The Whitmore mansion glowed that evening, warm with the sound of voices and clinking glass. A week had passed since the funeral, and though grief still lingered, the family had gathered around the long mahogany table, as if determined to act as though everything was normal. The chandelier above spilled golden light across polished silverware and crystal, dressing their sorrow in the disguise of celebration. Laughter rose here and there, but not everyone was laughing. At the far end of the table, young Clara fidgeted in her chair, her eyes wandering toward the tall windows that framed the storm outside. She froze. A man was standing there, just beyond the glass. Rain slid down the panes, but his figure was clear, tall, dressed in a dark suit damp from the storm. His shoulders were squared, his stance firm. But what caught Clara's breath were his eyes. He wasn't just staring. He looked hurt, as if the laughter inside was a sound that didn't belong to him, but once had. Clara tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mum," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Someone's outside." Her mother glanced quickly toward the window, just long enough for her smile to falter. She set her hand over Clara's, whispering sharply, "Don't look. Keep your eyes on the table." Then louder, she forced a laugh and nodded toward the cake being brought in, its candles flickering like tiny stars. But Clara couldn't forget what she saw, and when she dared one last glance, the man was still there. This time, his hand rested against the glass, leaving a faint imprint through the rain. Inside, the family raised their glasses in a toast. Outside, the stranger stood in silence, close enough to touch, yet kept apart by nothing more than a pane of glass, watching what was once his and what he had been denied. The birthday candles burned low, their wax spilling slowly down the sides as glasses rose for a toast. For a moment, the family felt united again, at least on the surface. The echo of their father's absence hovered over them, but Richard, ever the leader, tried to fill the void with steady authority. "To family," he said, lifting his glass. His voice was firm, commanding, "to the legacy our father left for us." Glasses clinked. A thin chorus of cheers rose, polite and brittle. The moment might have passed quietly, if not for Uncle Thomas, who leaned back in his chair and muttered, almost as if he meant no harm, "Well, unless there's another heir." The words slipped out so easily, but they landed like a stone in water. The ripples spread instantly. Forks stilled, smiles froze. For one long breath, the only sound was the faint hum of the chandelier above. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her glass, her lips pressing thin. She tried to dismiss it with a brittle laugh. "That old story again? Please, we've buried enough ghosts for one lifetime." But the ghosts had already been let in. Clara's mother lowered her eyes, her hand unconsciously brushing over Clara's hair, as if shielding her. One of the cousins shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. And Daniel, hot-headed, restless Daniel, pushed back from the table so hard his chair scraped across the floor. "You can pretend it's just gossip," he snapped, his voice trembling with anger, "but some of us know better." His words left a scar in the air. Eleanor's face went pale, her knuckles white against the stem of her glass. Richard's jaw locked, his glare fixed on Daniel, but Daniel didn't stay long enough to face it. He stormed out, footsteps echoing through the long hallway. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. No one dared look toward the window, but Clara did. And in the reflection of the glass, the man was still there, his handprint faint but visible, his eyes carrying the same sorrow she'd seen before. The mansion was quieter after Daniel stormed out, but the silence felt brittle, ready to shatter at the slightest sound. Long after the guests drifted away from the dining room, Henry, the house manager, walked down the narrow hall toward the security room. Checking the cameras was part of his nightly routine, but tonight his hands felt colder than usual as they pressed against the keyboard. One by one, the screens flickered to life. The driveway, the iron gates, the rose garden still dripping from rain. At first everything seemed ordinary, then Henry leaned closer. On the east garden camera, a man in a dark suit walked along the hedge, his pace deliberate, his eyes lifting just enough to glance at the lens. Henry's breath caught. He knew that face from the window earlier, the same sorrowful stare. His pulse quickened as he rewound the tape, hitting play again and again. Each time, the man appeared, unmistakable. Henry's first instinct was to call Richard, to show him proof that the stranger was real, but something, fear maybe, made him pause. He saved the clip into the archive folder, labelling it carefully. Then he leaned back, rubbing his temples, whispering to himself, "At least now they'll believe me." The next morning, Richard stormed into the security room, coffee steaming in his hand, his temper already frayed. "Henry," he barked, "show me what you saw." Henry's fingers shook as he clicked open the archive. The folder blinked empty. "What are you playing at?" Richard's voice was sharp, accusing. "I swear it was here," Henry's voice cracked. "I saw him. I saved the file. Someone must have..." He stopped, realising the weight of what he was about to say. Richard stepped closer, his glare burning. "You're telling me someone erased it? Do you have any idea what that means?" Henry swallowed hard. He knew exactly what it meant. Someone inside this house didn't want the truth to be seen. And in that chilling realisation, he remembered something else. The faint, wet handprint he had wiped from the glass that morning, still cold against his rag. The stranger had been real, and someone was helping him. Morning light poured into the dining room, soft and golden, but it did little to ease the heaviness that hung over the Whitmore family. They gathered again for breakfast, though no one touched their plates. Forks lay idle, coffee cooled untouched. Every eye carried suspicion from the night before. Then Eleanor noticed it. At the far end of the table, tucked just beneath the silver fruit bowl, lay a single envelope. Old, yellowed at the edges, its wax seal cracked but unbroken. Her breath caught in her throat. "Richard," she whispered, pointing. Richard's head snapped toward it. His jaw tightened as he reached across the table, lifting the envelope carefully. Faded words were written across the front in their father's unmistakable script. "To the rightful heir." The room erupted in whispers. That wasn't here last night. Where did it come from? Someone planted it. Henry, pale from lack of sleep, shook his head. "I locked this room myself. No one should have been able to..." He stopped, realising how that sounded. Richard's eyes burned into him. "Are you saying the envelope just walked in here on its own?" "No," Henry stammered. "I'm saying someone in this family put it there." The words stung. Eyes darted across the table, suspicion passing from face to face. Clara clung to her mother's arm, her small voice breaking through the tension. "Is it bad, Mama? What does it mean?" Her mother hushed her quickly, but no one else spoke. Eleanor's voice, fragile yet certain, filled the silence. "It's his handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. He meant for this to be read." Richard held the envelope tightly, as if it might vanish like the footage had. His voice was firm, but his eyes betrayed unease. "We're not opening this here, not yet, not like this." And as he tucked it into the drawer of the study desk, trying to assert control, Clara turned toward the window. The rain had stopped, but a faint handprint still clung to the glass. Fresh, as though pressed there only moments before. The study smelled of polished wood and old leather, the kind of room meant to hold secrets. The family gathered under their father's portrait, its painted eyes seeming to watch every word. On the heavy desk, the envelope lay like a wound no one wanted to touch. Richard stood at the head of the table, his voice sharp. "We can't open this without counsel. We wait until a lawyer is present." "That's stalling," Daniel shot back, pacing near the shelves. "You're terrified of what it might say." Eleanor sat stiff in the leather chair by the fire, her hands folded tight in her lap. "Please," she whispered. Arguing won't change the words written inside. But her plea fell flat. Voices rose, accusations cutting through the air like knives. One cousin claimed Eleanor had known the secret all along. Another pointed at Henry, insisting the old manager was helping someone slip into the house. Henry's face flushed. "I serve this family, always have, but I know what I saw on those cameras, and someone here doesn't want the truth out." The room erupted again, louder this time. Clara covered her ears, her small frame trembling against her mother's side. Then Richard slammed his hand on the desk, rattling the inkwell. "Enough! We'll settle this now." He yanked open the drawer where he had hidden the envelope. Empty. The study went silent. Even the ticking of the clock seemed to pause. Richard's face drained of colour. He turned slowly, eyes scanning each of them, his voice low but burning. "One of you took it?" No one answered. Eleanor's eyes glistened with tears she tried to hold back. Daniel's fists clenched as if ready to strike. Henry looked at the floor, ashamed though he'd done nothing. The portrait of their father loomed above them all, the painted gaze unyielding. And in that moment, every person in the room knew the envelope hadn't just disappeared. It was moving again, in someone's hands, and the secret inside was closer than ever to being revealed. That night, the Whitmore mansion felt heavier than stone. After the shouting in the study, no one slept easily. Behind closed doors, the family turned over the same question in their minds: who took the letter? Daniel lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling fan above. The anger that had driven him out of the dining room earlier now burned into something sharper: unease. He couldn't shake the image of Richard's face when the drawer was empty, or the suspicion in everyone's eyes. Then he heard it. A faint creak, not the old wood settling, but a step, slow, measured. Daniel sat up, straining his ears. The hall outside his door seemed to breathe. Another step followed, deliberate, as if whoever it was wanted to be heard. His chest tightened. He pushed the door open, the hinges groaning softly. The hallway stretched long under the glow of the sconces, shadows bending at the corners. At the far end, a figure stood near the window, a man in a dark suit, his outline clear, his face half lit. "Who's there?" Daniel called out, his voice harsher than he intended. The man didn't move, didn't speak, only lifted his hand slightly, just enough for Daniel to see something between his fingers. Paper, folded. Daniel's heart lurched, the envelope. But before he could take a step, a draught blew through the hall, rattling the curtains. The sconces flickered, and when Daniel's eyes snapped back to the end of the hall, the figure was gone. He rushed forward, but the space was empty. On the floor near the window, a single wax seal lay broken, glinting under the light. Daniel bent down, his pulse hammering. The seal was real, cold against his palm. The letter hadn't been imagined. Someone had it, and they wanted him to know. By the next evening, the mansion felt like it was holding its breath. Whispers carried down the halls, footsteps echoed too loudly, and every door seemed to close a little quicker than before. The envelope was gone, yet its absence was heavier than its presence had ever been. Henry, the house manager, moved quietly through the corridors, his keys jangling faintly at his side. Habit brought him to the study, his duty, he told himself, though part of him wished to stay far away. The door was ajar, a sliver of light spilled through. Henry pushed it open and froze. The room was dim, lit only by a single candle on the desk. The flame flickered, shadows dancing across the bookshelves and the large portrait above the fireplace. And there on the desk lay the envelope, its wax seal broken, the paper folded neatly as if waiting. Henry's breath caught. He stepped forward slowly, his hand trembling as it hovered above the letter. Then he felt it, another presence. From the far corner, where the candlelight thinned, a figure shifted. The man in the dark suit stepped forward, half his face illuminated, the other swallowed by shadow. His eyes, glinting in the glow, weren't cruel. They were steady, heavy, carrying years of silence and grief. Henry's throat tightened, his voice cracked. Why are you here?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he placed one hand gently on the letter, sliding it closer to Henry as if daring him to take it. Henry couldn't move. His legs rooted to the floor, his pulse thundered in his ears. For one suspended moment, the two men stared across the desk, the letter between them. Then the candle guttered in the draught, plunging the room into shadow. When the flame steadied again, the man was gone, but the envelope was not. In its place, on the polished wood, lay a single torn page, words scrawled in their father's unmistakable hand. "To the child I once abandoned." Henry staggered back, gripping the edge of the desk. He knew he could no longer pretend this was rumour. The truth was alive in the house, moving between them like a living ghost. By the next afternoon, the family crowded back into the study. Richard stood at the desk, the torn page Henry had found now resting on the polished wood. The rest of the envelope had been returned too, left on the desk as though placed there on purpose. No one admitted to bringing it back. Richard's fingers hovered above the brittle paper before finally breaking the silence. We read it, together, no more delays. Eleanor sat in the leather chair near the fire, her lips pressed tight, her eyes glistening. Daniel leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, masking fear with anger. Clara clung to her mother's skirt, wide-eyed. Henry stood near the door, his face pale, as though bracing for judgment. Richard unfolded the letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, the bold, deliberate strokes of their father's hand. "To my family, those who bear my name and the one who does not." Gasps filled the room. Eleanor whispered something under her breath, too soft for anyone to catch. Richard read on, his voice unsteady. "I have carried a sin for too many years. There was a child, my child, born outside these walls. In my fear and pride, I turned away. That choice has haunted me, and no fortune can cleanse it." The words landed like stones. A cousin muttered, "It can't be true." Another hissed back, "Look at him, he admits it." Richard's jaw clenched as he kept reading. "To the rightful heir I leave what is mine. This inheritance is not meant to punish but to restore. If you deny this truth, you deny me as well." The paper trembled in his grip. Daniel's voice cut through the silence. "So it's true, everything. He abandoned a child and now we're supposed to hand over everything to a stranger?" Eleanor closed her eyes, her voice breaking. "I thought it would stay buried. I thought I was protecting all of you." But Clara, too young to understand the weight of the words, tugged at her mother's arm. "Mama, he's outside again." Every head turned toward the tall window. The fading light of day cast long shadows, and there, half hidden behind the glass, stood the man in the dark suit. His eyes didn't burn with anger this time. They glistened with something else. Grief. The study air felt heavier after the letter was read, every word still ringing in their ears. But Clara's whisper had cut deeper than any line on the page. "He's outside again." Richard's face hardened. Without a word, he strode out of the study, his footsteps echoing through the marble hall. The rest of the family followed, hesitant but compelled, drawn like moths toward the front door. Richard yanked it open. The man stood there, framed by the evening light. Rain clung to his suit, his shoes damp from the gravel path, but his stance was steady, unshaken. For the first time they saw him clearly. His features bore no disguise, strong jaw, tired eyes, and those eyes mirrored something familiar. The same shade as their father's. Eleanor gasped, stumbling back a step, her hand clutching her chest. "Dear God," she whispered. Richard squared his shoulders, his voice cutting sharp. "Who are you? What do you want from us?" The man didn't flinch. His gaze swept over the family one by one, pausing at Eleanor before settling back on Richard. His voice, low and steady, carried the weight of years unspoken. "I don't want your wealth, I don't want your name. I came for one thing only, the truth you've hidden all my life." Daniel muttered under his breath, anger laced with fear. "This is insane." The man reached into his coat, pulling out a folded photograph. The paper was worn, the edges frayed from being carried too long. He opened it with care, holding it out for all to see. The picture showed their father, younger, standing in the very mansion where they stood now. Beside him, Eleanor, her arms stiff at her side, and between them a boy no older than 5, clutching the leg of the chair he stood beside. His face was unmistakable. It was him. The room behind them fell into a hush so deep it seemed the house itself was listening. "I was here once," the man said softly, his voice catching. "But you chose to erase me. I didn't come to destroy you. I came to be seen, if only once, to be remembered as more than a mistake." His eyes glistened not with anger but with a sorrow that made even Richard falter. Eleanor's knees gave way and she sank into a chair by the hall. Tears slid down her face, her voice breaking. "He told me, but I buried it. I thought if no one knew, the family would stay whole." The man tucked the photograph back into his coat, his shoulders heavy but proud. "You buried me along with that secret, and I lived every day knowing I was never meant to exist." The wind outside surged, rattling the open door. For the first time, the Whitmores couldn't look at one another. The stranger had spoken what none of them dared, and there was no taking it back. The hallway was silent except for the steady drip of rain from the man's coat onto the marble floor. The photograph still burned in their minds, undeniable proof of what had been hidden. Eleanor's shoulders shook as she lifted her face toward him. "I should have fought for you," she whispered through tears. "I told myself silence would protect this family, but all I did was abandon you too." The man's eyes softened, though his jaw remained tight. He gave the faintest nod, not in forgiveness, but in recognition. "I didn't come for revenge," he said quietly. "I came so the truth would no longer be buried with him." That's all I ever wanted." Richard opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The weight of leadership he carried for years felt meaningless now. Daniel turned away, unable to face the stranger's gaze. The cousins stood frozen, their inheritance no longer feeling like something to covet. The man stepped back toward the open door. The storm had quieted, leaving only the soft patter of drops on the gravel path. Before crossing the threshold, he turned once more, his eyes sweeping the family who had tried to erase him. "Remember me," he said simply, "even if it's too late to know me." Then he walked out into the night, the door closing softly behind him. Inside, the Whitmores stood in silence. Eleanor sank into a chair, her tears staining the letter still spread on the desk. The wax seal lay broken beside it, small but unyielding, like the truth itself. The chandelier above flickered, casting long shadows across the walls, as if the house itself was unsettled. Because in the end, the greatest inheritance wasn't money or land, it was the truth. And the truth, no matter how long ignored, always found its way back. In the end, the Whitmores learned too late that wealth and silence can never outweigh the weight of the truth. What we choose to bury often comes back, not to destroy us, but to remind us of what we failed to face. Lesson: the greatest inheritance we can leave behind is not riches, but honesty. Because only truth can set a family free from the chains of regret. Question: if there were a truth in your own life that could change everything, would you have the courage to bring it into the light, or would you let it remain in the dark? Thank you for watching. Until next time, see you again, here on Rain Inside.